To the cloud or to the computer? To the cloud.
I just did it to the cloud, yeah.
Okay.
And just a reminder to everyone to keep yourselves muted if you're not talking. Thanks so much. And I am so excited for this program. Basically, the title, the new-ish, Jewish economy, I attribute to our awesome speaker, Kate Poole. I love that title, and she'll elaborate more on that, obviously. But basically, the idea is that we all need to be more intentional about where we put our money, what we buy, and where we invest. I think sometimes we forget that what we put our money in shows the values and the priorities of our society, and we stop thinking about how those decisions reflect on us and reflect on the society that we eventually end up with. So I'm really excited today to have our awesome Rabbi Anna give us a quick devar, and then I will introduce our two speakers, Ari Bortman and Kate Poole, and then they will each, Ari's just going to do a quick conversation to tell us about why it's important that we take a deeper look at how we invest. And then Kate will talk to us about how we can go about doing that, and how it's not really a new idea to do these things. It's actually rooted in our traditional faith-based Jewish values from ancient teachings. So Rabbi, I'm gonna hand it off to you for a quick devar. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dara, and thank you, Tikkun Olam Committee, for putting on this program. It is so wonderful to have such a vibrant Tikkun Olam Committee in our congregation that's really a light and an inspiration, and comes up with these programs, and I have very little to do with it. It's just great. I've been studying the Psalms, or restudying the Psalms, and there's one Psalm that just kind of came out with lights around it when thinking about this particular topic that we're about to embrace and really kind of get into and reflect on. And it's Psalm 24. So I'll read it because the whole thing, because it's short. Psalm of David. The earth is Adonai's and all it contains, the world and all its inhabitants. For God founded it upon the ocean, set it on the nether streams. Who may ascend the mountain of Adonai? Who may stand in God's holy place? One who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not taken a false oath or sworn deceitfully. That one shall carry away a blessing from Adonai, a just reward from God, their deliverer. Such is the circle of those who turn to God, Jacob, who seek your presence, Selah. O gates, lift up your heads, up high your everlasting doors, so the ruler of glory may come in. Who is the sovereign of glory? Adonai, mighty and valiant. Adonai, valiant in battle. O gates, lift up your heads, lift them up, your everlasting doors, so the ruler of glory may come in. Who is the ruler of glory? Adonai of hosts. That one is the ruler of glory, Selah. So why did I choose this? I chose it thinking about that really, truly, the Jewish orientation to ownership is that everything in this world truly belongs to God. God is the original owner, if that can be said. And so God owns wealth, and that is central to traditional Jewish economic philosophy at a personal level, communal level, national, and universal level. First fruits were given in the temple, thanking God for bountiful produce. The land is in the hands of Adonai and must rest 7 years and then lie fallow. Our entire material world is on loan to us. Our life even is on loan to us. All goods must be returned to their original owners every 50 years at the Jubilee. Material and spiritual freedom are intimately linked, and the basis of all is not financial equity, but the pursuit of justice. And we have a practice, a central practice in our tradition, which helps remind us and recalibrate us of this central orientation, and that is Shabbat. Shabbat is a gift from God to help us recalibrate, to not let our human desire go, unhinged and turn into a lust for security that then turns into a sense of greed or entitlement. Shabbat is there to help us remember our purpose in the world and to return to a sense of faith that ultimately God will provide what it is that we need and remind us exactly what it is that we need as opposed to what we want. I'll conclude actually with a text from Deuteronomy chapter 15, which I think guides the Tikkun Olam Committee and guides so much of our work, and also kind of anchors this teaching that I've been sharing. If there is a needy person among you, one of your siblings in any of your cities, in the land that Adonai gives you, you shall not harden your heart or close your hand against your needy sibling. Rather, you shall open your hand to that person. You shall lend to that person sufficiently for what they need. Beware that you may harbor the thought that the 7th year is approaching, the sabbatical year, so that you are mean to your needy sibling and give that one nothing. They will cry out to Adonai against you, and it will be your guilt. Give to your sibling readily, and have no regrets when you do so, for in turn, Adonai will bless you in all your efforts and all your undertaking. So may God bless us in our efforts and our undertaking and our continual searching to find, a path of justice in this very imperfect society, economic system that we have been dealt. So I'm really looking forward to learning with you this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I would follow that by saying we haven't been dealt this economic society. We have created it, and it may be our duty to improve on it as much as we can. Like you always like to tell us, it's not our duty to finish the work, but neither can we not do any of it, right? So let's do what we can to be more intentional and think about how we want our society to look and ways we can do that when we spend and invest our money. So a quick introduction of our 2 speakers today, and then I'll let them go. Ari Bortman, who also happens to be my son, so I'm a little biased, but Ari is a campus organizer for fossil-free Penn, pushing the University of Pennsylvania to divest its endowment from the fossil fuel industry. Additionally, he has become a national organizer for the fossil fuel divestment movement, helping groups at universities around the world create their own campaigns. In February, Ari helped to organize an International Day of Action and Escalation, demanding divestment at over 50 campuses across the globe. He has worked with divestment campaigns in the United States, Canada, Africa, and Australia. Ari is now also leading an effort to coordinate and unify campus divestment campaigns with other student activist groups called the College Climate Coalition. He often volunteers with the Sunrise Movement and the Youth Climate Strikes in Philadelphia. He studies mechanical engineering and energy and sustainability at the University of Pennsylvania. And after Ari speaks about why we need to think about this more deliberatively, especially in the clean energy and fossil fuel area, our awesome speaker, Kate Poole, who I'm so excited about, is going to talk about how we might do that. Kate started her work in the new economy space at Schumacher Center for New Economics after graduating from Princeton University in 2009, where she wrote her thesis on the intersection of spiritual beliefs and economic action. She co-founded Regenerative Finance in 2014 to organize other young people with wealth to shift control of capital to communities most affected by racial, economic, and environmental injustices. She is a member of Resource Generation, a nonprofit organizing young people with wealth to redistribute land, wealth, and power. And she has served on the board of directors of the Schumacher Center for New Economics since 2017. She is also a founding partner of Chordata Capital, founded in 2018, based on the goal of nurturing an economy that works for everyone. So from that, I will let Ari take over. And I think he's going to share his screen and talk for a few minutes, and then Kate. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us today. And Kate will be leading some commenting and journaling in the chat. But if you do have questions along the way, we'll be doing a Q&A at the end. So feel free to put your questions as you think of them in the chat. And Susan Milner will be moderating that and keeping an eye on that as well. All right, Ari, go for it.
Awesome, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. My name's Ari. I use he, him pronouns. Great to see everyone. So lots of people, lots of friends, my entire family. Mazel Tov Templetons. So lots of wonderful people here. Yeah, so here, let me share my screen real quick. And so I am the campaign coordinator of Fossil Free Penn at the University of Pennsylvania. And we're demanding that the university divest from fossil fuels in particular. We're an environmental justice focused group. And we're going to talk, I want to talk a bit about why we have chosen this particular kind of more nuanced avenue for our activism at the university, because our values are reflected in our investments and where we put our money. And the allocation of our investments and our spending is reflected in outcomes in our community, especially where I work and with groups I work with at universities that have a lot of financial sway because they're so big. But it is the truth for all of us in all of the ways that we allocate our money. So we say to the university, divest from destruction for profit and reinvest not in the fossil fuel industry's next extractivist manifestation, even if it is green and less carbon intensive, but reinvest in just sustainable community-led solutions. And what does that mean? So I'll tell you a little bit about who we are as a group. We're part of a national campaign, a global campaign actually, demanding divestment at campuses around the world, which began in 2010 with students from right here in Philadelphia at Swarthmore, who were taken on a university trip to West Virginia to visit a mountaintop removal coal mining site, where a mountain is basically leveled part of the way up to extract coal from the ground. And they visited a guy named Larry Fink, who was the only person in his community who resisted selling his property to the coal mine developers. And they came and saw his land, and it was barren. The ground is literally poisonous with heavy metals. And his community members, his neighbors came and spoke to the students and told the students about how their water was poisonous, how they had developed rare cancers. And they told the students about how they had been threatened and strong-armed by the fossil fuel developers, by the coal mine developers, financially and physically, into selling their land for the development of the mine. And it was a great opportunity for Swarthmore University to righteously kind of point a finger and say, look how bad mountaintop removal coal mining is. Look how badly we need to solve the problem of dependence on fossil fuels. But when the students got back to their university, they found out that the university was invested in the very companies that were carrying out that mountaintop removal coal mining. So the university was very happy to point their righteous finger and espouse their value of solving climate change. But behind closed doors, they were more than happy to allow the cause of the problem to continue as long as it was making them money. In a similar way that we are it's easy for us to kind of call out the badness of politicians accepting money to pass policy that favors industry. We as investors are kind of getting ourselves paid off in the same way, accepting the assets and dividends of investment in industries whose business model is destroying lives and homes for profit. And something that really needs to be touched on to make this as poignant as it has to be is the negative effects of the fossil fuel industry, just as an example, are not just what comes directly out of smokestacks. The fossil fuel industry's lever to exacerbate climate change is not just how much they burn. It's also millions and millions of dollars that they spend every year lobbying politicians to stymie progress towards cleaner energy, towards more just solutions. Millions of dollars spent every year to spread misleading and false science to slow down clean progress. It's practices in which they intentionally and pointedly place dirty fossil fuel infrastructure in Black, brown, and low-income communities who have the least leverage and least ability to protect themselves from being filled with pollutants. And what we see is that obviously the fossil fuel industry is going to benefit from a lack of change from the fossil fuel burning status quo. And we know, it is scientific fact, there's no getting around it, that if we continue to burn, people, lives, and homes will be destroyed so that the fossil fuel industry and we who invest in them can continue to make money. And this is a story that we see oddly over and over and over again, in which a few people with wealth, with power, with political access are able to make more money and make more rules make the rules with very little regard for what happens to everybody else. We see it in the pharmaceutical industry, who is able to pay doctors to push opioids on patients with the knowledge of how addictive they were. And we see it when private prisons partner with municipal governments and private police forces to make deals to keep prisons full, regardless of whether the people who end up inside of them necessarily deserve to be there. And in the case of climate change, we often say, wow, it's awful that the effects of climate change are being felt so disproportionately by people in Pacific Islands, for example, who are the least responsible for causing the problem of climate change. We say this injustice results from climate change and it's terrible. But we need to begin to realize that climate change and its disproportionate effects are just one result of a system of injustices in which wealth and power allow corporations, allow people with political access to make the rules and make more money with little regard for what happens to everybody else. So that's why we say divest from destruction for profit. A lot of people in environmental movements and justice movements say people over profit. So we need to choose people over profit. And I actually tell my organizers, we let's not use that phrase, because that implies that there's no that doing the right thing, doing the clean thing, doing the just, compassionate thing must come at cost. But the truth is, there's gonna be profit one way or the other, no matter what we do. The question is, how is that profit created and for whom? If we, when we say reinvest in just sustainable community-led solutions, which is what Kate's going to talk about, that profit there, we're talking about profit for our communities, for communities who have been hurt, who have been killed, who have been torn apart, whose homes have been destroyed by an extractivist, industries like the fossil fuel industry up to now. And so we need to, so what Kate's going to talk about is, what does that mean? How do we build up systems that are different from this system that seems to be so ubiquitous, where concentrated wealth is able to make money at the expense of other people? And how is that different from just investing in what we say here, the next extractivist manifestations? Thinking, is it different for our economy to be powered by solar power if that solar power is controlled again by a few very wealthy entities who are able to leverage their wealth and their influence to just take advantage of different people and destroy different natural resources to make money from their source of energy generation that just happens to be a little bit less carbon intensive? So we say we want to divest from destruction from profit, divest from fossil fuels, divest from extractivist industries, and reinvest not just in their next extractivist manifestations, but in sustainable community-led solutions. And that's what I think Kate is here to talk to us about.
Sweet, thank you so much. Thanks, Ari, thanks, Dara. Thank you, Rabbi Anna. I'm really grateful for you all inviting me into your virtual synagogue space. So it's great to meet you and to see you.
I forgot to run the poll at the beginning. Do you want me to do that now?
Yeah, let's do this now as a way of linking, when you're thinking about Judaism or your faith, like, how does it shape your actions in the world? What kinds of things does it influence?
So I've just launched a poll. If you guys can take a minute to answer these two questions. The first one, you can select all that apply, and the first one is all that apply. The second one is just the best one. Come on, folks. I have about 15 responses. I want a lot more than that from you guys. There we go.
Wow, yeah, so the trend we're starting to see, which is what I suspected, but is that many of you, it looks like 88% of you, your Jewish or your faith tradition influences your giving, 70% it influences your activism, 45% work, and then like the smallest slice is around investing, which only 24% of you are saying that your Jewish or your faith tradition values are shaping your investing. And so I think that that is pretty common. I actually think it's kind of high for this group, so you can give yourselves props if you're already doing that. I think this world of integrating values into your investing strategy is one that's relatively new. And I think even a generation ago, that was something that wasn't on a lot of people's radars. And then with the values aligned investing, we have 4 pros in the house. Thank you for being here. 17 somewhat familiar, and 13 people that are brand new. So I'm going to try not to use any jargon or like especially technical language, but if I do, please put your question in the chat. I'm happy to explain and break things down. Great. So, so now y'all can see the results, I think. So let me share my screen and then re-find the window that has your faces in it over here. Great. So hi, I'm Kate. I am relatively nearby, maybe to some of you. I live in Stockton, New Jersey. Do people live near me? Are y'all, maybe some people live up there? Okay. Hi, neighbors. And I used to live in West Philly for a long time. So I'm still a member of Colt Sedek. And I'm an investment advisor with Chordata Capital, investment with a backbone. And I'm also part of Resource Generation, which Dara named. And even though I'm an investment advisor, I'm not any of y'all's investment advisors as far as I can see. And so the information I'm sharing isn't specific to your financial situation. It's not investment advice for you. It's just information that you can take and do with it what you will. Okay. And so over the last few years, I've been really lucky to be working with Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg, who's here, Nadav, David, Rachel Plattis, and a bunch of folks on what does Jewish economics look like? And so I've always been really interested in the intersection of religious belief and the actions that we take in the world. And I was really lucky when I moved to West Philly after college. There was this really beautiful, vibrant, queer Jewish community that was really connecting the lines between Jewish practices and then activism, giving, organizing. And so I've been really grateful for that. And I've also really found that doing this work Jewishly of moving money, talking about investing, talking about the economy, it really helps ground something that can feel kind of abstract or hard to comprehend in our practices and our traditions. And so I thought, because there's so many ways to approach this and we have this kind of block of time together, I wanted to anchor it in 3 principles: reparations, sustainability, and democracy. And so I'm using these as pillars so that we can talk about the work kind of through these lenses. And for each principle, I'm going to share some Jewish framing, invite you into reflection on how that principle shows up in your life and in your faith, and then share some next steps and an investment that embodies that principle. And so for the reflection part, you can either, some of you are in groups, so you can just talk about it with each other, or you can grab a pen and paper and do some writing yourself. So the first one I wanted to talk about is reparations, which I think is a really important pillar as we're thinking about transforming the economy. And so for me, the Jewish framework I often draw upon is teshuvah, and that really anchors a lot of the work that I'm doing around working towards repair and supporting Black sovereignty. And so you're probably most familiar with this concept in the context of Yom Kippur. We talk about teshuvah as meaning to turn or return. And it's this process of self-examination and asking for forgiveness, working in the world to make things right. And so it's both like an individual and responsibility to look at the harm that you've caused, and it's also a collective responsibility that we take on as a community together. And so when I think about teshuvah and reparations, I think about the massive harm that came and created the current disparities in our economy, and the way that racism and white supremacy especially have shaped who has access to wealth and whose wealth is protected and whose wealth is stolen. And so the practice of teshuvah offers these specific clues to and a framework around what it can look like to work towards repair. And so I want to just share like a really concrete story, which is I grew up outside of Baltimore in Pikesville, it's a Jewish suburb, and I went to shul downtown, like in a Black neighborhood. I kind of didn't know what that was about growing up. But eventually what I learned is that my family used to live in that neighborhood downtown and had actually built wealth in that community and then scooped that wealth up and moved to the suburbs. And my family actually come from a wealthy family. My family was able to build wealth in large part because my Jewish ancestors were able to assimilate into whiteness and get access to capital, access to financing, and access to having their wealth protected. And so when I was raised, like I was raised to be generous, to seek justice, all those pieces, but I wasn't really raised to look at like how my wealth or my privilege implicated me and kind of other suffering or other poverty that was happening in the world. And so I didn't see how racism was connected to who had access to wealth, that kind of thing. And then I think when I grew up, especially through being politicized, like in high school and college and those kinds of things, I started to look around and be able to see kind of who had wealth and who didn't have wealth. And also was able to ask my family, like, where did our wealth come from? And our wealth came from my great grandfather who had a straw hat factory. It also came from property that they were able to purchase and own. And it came from investments too in the stock market. And something I also wanted to name that like my family has kind of a complicated, and I think many white Jewish Americans have a complicated relationship to whiteness, whether they are like, I'm white or I'm Jewish. I just wanted to name that like, yes, like anti-Semitism is real, and like Jews have been under threat and continue to be under threat in like our culture. And also there's a way that many white Jewish Americans have been able to accumulate wealth, and accumulating wealth in this country always means benefiting from racist systems. And so in my own journey of reparations, as I've been looking at, okay, I have this wealth that I inherited, what does it look like to work towards repair? I was really interested in supporting economic power building in Black communities in Baltimore. In particular, I was looking at this specific neighborhood where my ancestors had accumulated wealth. And so I was doing different kinds of projects, different kinds of giving and investing. And then I had the opportunity, someone asked if I wanted to meet these people that were running a Black land fund in Baltimore City. And so I went with them and we pulled up and it was right across the street from the synagogue that I was bat mitzvahed in, the exact footprint, the exact neighborhood where my ancestors had built wealth, and this really beautiful opportunity that in many ways I'd really prayed for, to be able to support Black economic power building. And so at the time, this was a couple of years ago, I was able to make a big money movement for me, the biggest I had ever made, to support this work. And it actually was in the form of an investment that they were then able to return, and it was able to kind of build this cycle and relationship. And I also got to work with them, to work with my synagogue as well, and got to give a sermon there last summer on Juneteenth. Well, I guess the non-pandemic summer that we had on Juneteenth, that was really beautiful about the work and connecting this piece around reparations to our Jewish faith. So I think that's what I wanted to share about this kind of practice and value. Try to get really specific, because I think that we can talk about many things when we talk about reparations. And so now I wanted to give y'all, maybe 4 or 5 minutes to either in your group of people that you're with or on your own, think about how does the value of justice or reparations show up in your life, and what other Jewish ideas or practices connect to reparations. And so it's 4:34, I'll give you until like 4:38, and then you can pop your ideas in the chat, talk with each other, and then we'll come back together and I'll share an example about an investment. So feel free to pop your reflections or ideas or questions in the chat. I'm seeing this practice from Mariana, donate lots of money to redistribute wealth. Yeah, totally. I'm here to investing in companies owned by people of color. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so wrapping up, I just wanted to give people a chance to kind of land. I think it can be hard to talk about these things. And so I'm glad so many of you are together and can have these little kind of touch points and conversations with each other too. Sweet. Okay. So I wanted to share an example about a way to incorporate reparations into your giving and investing. So the first piece kind of connects back to the story that I shared around learning your family history, and if your family has wealth or land, trying to understand where that came from and if there's opportunities for repair there. And then the other piece is about investing in Black economic power building. And so one of the main harms in our economy is the racial wealth divide. And so there are strategic ways to support Black-led financial infrastructure that can work to repair the wealth divide. Kind of more specifically, I wanted to highlight Hope Credit Union, which is a credit union in the Mississippi Delta. It's Black-led, and they do really beautiful racial and economic justice work. They're a part of a network of credit unions and other kind of community development financial institutions that all are working to address the history of racism in the finance sector and looking to move more capital to low-income communities of color across the country. And I'm going to share some resources about the kind of variety of investments that are included in community investments. Okay, and so another value, kind of the second one, is sustainability. And so, I mean, sustainability can mean many things. Here, I'm talking about community resiliency that comes from rooting wealth and power in place and in service of human needs on a finite planet, and about interdependence and balance. And I'm actually really lucky because Rabbi Anna really talked about some of the Jewish themes that I was thinking about and thinking about sustainability in terms of Shabbat as this rest, as this anti-capitalist practice where we aren't working, where we're not producing, and also of Shemitah, this practice of every 7 years releasing debt, of having the land lay fallow and really creating space and redistribution. And the other piece that I included here is this document, 7 Core Jewish Agricultural Values from the Jewish Farm School, which used to be in Philly. I don't know if people are connected to Nati Pesso and his work, but I think that there are so many ways that Jewish tradition offers support in thinking about what kind of a balanced, resilient, sustainable economy can look like. And so maybe for this value around sustainability, maybe just take maybe 2 or 3 minutes, kind of how it's showing up for you. And maybe if there's a person that wants to share out loud too, to break up my lecturing, I'd invite someone to share. So how does the value of sustainability show up in your life? And are there other Jewish ideas or practices connected to sustainability? Yes, I will put the sustainability definition back. I think it's where is it?
An answer I always think about sustainability and values is tzedakah, which is a simple one, and we always think of it as like giving money, but tzedakah actually comes from the Jewish word tzedek, which means justice. And I think it draws a really important distinction. And when we're thinking about tzedakah, it's not just about giving and being done. It's about creating a sustainable system, a sustainable and just system that isn't just a wily infusion of capital. It's a pointed and intentional way of giving power to people who have been denied power and denied opportunity by a system up to now.
Sweet, thanks.
Does anyone else want to add a point?
Yeah, I talk a lot about, I don't know if I talk about sustainability. I talk about interdependence when I give a Devar Torah, and the idea that we can do it alone is it's I think it's a big American lie, and I think there's, especially in a time of COVID, there's no way that we can do it alone, and we need each other. And I think sustainability includes, notions about the earth for sure, but interdependence just means that we are part of a web, and that we're not supposed to be able to do things by ourselves, solely by ourselves, and that we should look to each other, to build lasting, and for community and support. I feel like I could say more, but
I'll just make a quick point also. When I think of sustainability, I think of ensuring that we're living in a way now that doesn't affect the ability of future generations to live well in the future. So that's what I think of about when I think of sustainability, that it's not damaging anyone's resources or ability to live well and have what we have today in the future.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's lovely. I really like that one, Dara. I would just wanted to comment on something that I've just recently been involved with, which is a community garden. I'm part of the Interfaith Food Alliance, which we are very much involved with Colomet. I'm the liaison, and we have a community garden, and we're working with people from the Doylestown College to talk about how to work with the land, how to use the crops for many, many people and families in the Lower Bucks area who do not have food. They're going to help with the gardens. It's a project that's going to be going on and with a number of other churches, synagogues, and mosques. And I really see that as a form of sustainability as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think these were all great examples. On the investing side, I wanted to share a little bit about interest and charging interest. So something that's interesting about Jewish teachings, and actually just like recent Jewish history, is that there's a practice of giving people free loans or 0% interest loans to support them in economic development. And so one practice to try out is making a 0% interest loan or contributing to a Hebrew Free Loan Society. And another one is really figuring out, if you have investments, how that money is making more money, like where do the returns come from, and looking at investment structures where it's not extractive, where there is sustainability. So one example I wanted to share is this group Seed Commons, a community wealth cooperative, and the way that they structure their lending they lend to co-ops, so to these democratically controlled businesses, mostly worker co-ops. And the way that they do that lending is they decide, what will it look like when your co-op is successful? What does profit look like for you? And when they have profit, they share it back with investors. But if there's not profit, they're not repaying back into the pool. And so that's a way of kind of shaking up who's taking risks and what the investment structure looks like, so that you're never, I think the phrase that they used in here that I quoted, a borrower is never going to be worse off than before in working with them. And then the third and final value I wanted to talk about, which kind of connects to cooperatives, is democracy. And so I think that something that's so wrong with our economy is that so few are making decisions that impact so many, and there's not a lot of democracy in how we navigate like our economic realities and how people navigate work and those kinds of things. And so I think I pulled like a couple examples around Jewish practices of taking care for each other, but something that really felt intuitive to me about this value is that a community, or when I was growing up, like the synagogue, that Jewish people have always shared wealth and power to support each other, to support thriving. And what does it look like to expand, like who's a part of our community, so that we can be expanding how we're thinking about sharing wealth and power. And if Jessica feels up for it, I was going to call on my friend, Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg, to offer an example or a little framing here.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here and learn with you all. I mean, I think like it's one of those interesting things because Torah is not like exactly, doesn't like, you know, there's a hierarchy, there's priests, they have more power. There's not like a model of like democratic community-based decision-making, or as Reconstructionists, we would say of like values make decision-making, and you know, there's not like a board making decisions through that's democratically elected in the Torah. But for me, the value of like every human life and B'Tselem Elohim and being created in the divine image is a root from which we evolve the practice of, if every human being is divine and matters, and if every voice is sacred, then we have to create structures by which like every person can contribute, and every voice is held equally and is heard. And so like from there, I think that's for me where I really root the idea of democracy and one person, one vote as a Jewish value, because it honors all of our sacredness.
Great, thank you. And so in addition to like that framing, I'm curious if people have other ideas about how democracy connects to Jewish ideas or practices, or other ways that this value of democracy shows up in your life. And you can put it in the chat or invite people to speak up too.
I feel like the idea that everybody is a Torah. Everybody has their perfectly unique way of seeing life, their unique thing to offer in this world. And one of the big reasons that I'm a rabbi is that I seek to help people find their voice in community. And I think, you know, those same principles apply to our life every day, that everybody should be able to express themselves and to be themselves fully, to live their Torah in the world.
Thanks. Yeah, and being engaged in the political process, I see in the chat, definitely, definitely. And so like the examples that I wanted to share around democracy and investing. So on the decision-making side, well, I guess just as some general framing, like something that's really important to me in the work that I do is not just shifting wealth and like where the money is, it's also shifting power and who's making decisions over how that money is invested and who has access to that money. Because even though we're all brilliant here, no one knows what's best for someone else. And so the people that are closest to the problem need to be the ones that have the power to make the decisions about the solution. And so some of the ways to experiment with sharing power are through participating in things like giving circles or other processes where you can make a collective decision about where money is given. Bread and Roses in Philly has a really beautiful kind of giving project program where people come together across race and class to do political learning together and then move money, do fundraising and moving money. And then there's also ways to invest in cooperative funds. And specifically wanted to shout out Ujima Fund in Boston, which is a really beautiful community controlled investment fund. And that fund, the people that are in the communities that are like Dorchester and Roxbury, that the neighborhoods that Ujima is working in, they are voting members and they have a vote whether you invest $100 or $100,000. Each person has one vote around the investment. And then if you don't live there, you can be like a non-voting solidarity member. But in that way, they're trying to keep the decisions closest to the people that are most affected. And this is also a fund that's focused on Black and Brown people that are working class in Boston. And so they have other ways that they're trying to figure out what does it look like to center racial and economic justice in the decision making that they're doing as a community controlled investment fund. And so I also wanted to share these little links. So what I'll do is I'll share this slide deck out, and I guess it can be emailed to you, so you can click through to these different links and kind of explore some of the resources and investments that I shared. I have a zine that I made about investing in the solidarity economy, which is the solidarity economy is like another way to talk about an economy that centers like racial and economic justice. I linked to this article that Rabbi Jessica and I did in the Jewish Currents magazine, and then also Resource Generation and this community Next Egg, which is a group of people that are moving their retirements off of Wall Street into community investing. And also I saw a question in the chat, are you invested in B Corps? So B Corps is a kind of rating system designed to support corporations in, you know, doing more equitable work. It's about both like the climate impact, paying people a living wage, like all these different factors. And so I am connected to this investment fund, the Force for Good Fund, which funds, I think, women and people of color led B Corps. So I'm a little bit connected to that, but something to think about as we think about investing is this framing that Ari offered around around corporations and kind of like what corporations do in this country, and then look at, is it possible within your investing to pull some of money out of corporations or out of Wall Street or mutual funds and put it directly into these kinds of community investments that are centering repair, sustainability, and democracy. So wanted to offer that piece of kind of overall framing. And so thank you for taking in all that information. I hope that it can be useful in some of the work you're doing or some of the ways that you're investing. And yeah, I'm totally open to answering questions or people offering other ideas, and appreciate the time today.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was so great and interesting. I know I have a bunch of questions, but I'll let other people in the audience ask theirs first. So Susan Milner is watching the chat. If people decide to type their question in the chat, you can also kind of raise your hand and unmute yourself. We'll try to do it in a controlled manner so that the people aren't talking over each other. But if you would like to ask a question, maybe just put a note in the chat that you have a question, and Susan Milner will call on you to ask your question. Okay, so Susan, I'll let you either ask questions that people type in or call on people.
One first question, what do you think of the PAX funds, PAX?
Yeah, I think it comes into this piece around kind of investing in corporations versus communities. And so I think that there are a lot of groups like PAX or like Calvert who are building mutual funds where they're doing like shareholder advocacy or other forms of activism to work to make corporations better. And I think that for people that have more wealth than they need, I'm always encouraging them to invest kind of in the community-centered investments over different kinds of mutual funds or corporate investing. But, you know, like it's all a process. And so if the thing that feels like most doable is taking a first step, I'll share a resource in this chat. There's As You Sow has a good resource for looking at your mutual funds or holdings and kind of seeing what's inside and evaluating them. That can be a really great first way to look at, oh, where am I invested? Where do I want to start to make shifts? You can shift the kind of mutual funds that you're in, but you can also look at if there's space to include community investing in the work that you're doing. And so that's kind of good newbie. I saw that question about good resources for newbies. So the values investing, the As You Sow resource, which I'll find and link, is a good one. And then for looking at community investments, there's a group called Opportunity Finance Network, which is a collection of community investments. And then New Economy Coalition is a really beautiful organization that highlights many different groups that are in the solidarity economy that can help get you oriented there. So I'll put those in the chat.
Anyone else? What types of returns are typical from community investments?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a range. Like right now we're experiencing a horrible pandemic, and so interest rates are really low, as they should be. But I think somewhere in the range of like 0 to 4 or 5% is kind of the range of what you can expect with community investments. And then there's a kind of whole other in-between zones. There's community investments, there's Wall Street, and there's this world of impact investing. So there's things like investing in renewable energy corporations or investing in affordable housing. And that can kind of be in between like the community rate return and the Wall Street return. And I guess another thing too, we've seen this year is like Wall Street, there's this myth around market rate returns that they're going to be a certain amount year to year. And that's not true because we are living in a finite planet, infinite growth isn't possible. And so there's this way in which I think this year helped to see, oh, the stock market isn't reflecting what's happening with the real economy. So it's not necessarily a place where there's necessarily going to be more wealth generated than in community investments. There's all different kinds of risks and returns happening.
Really important. I want everybody anybody who came in late may not know we are recording this session and are going to be able to also save the chat so that hopefully we can make this available. These documents, you shared so much information.
Yeah, totally.
To take in and very, very valuable, but we want to make it available to everybody who's participated. Kate has put the new economy.
Yeah, I'm putting a couple of links that could be helpful to check out different investments in the chat. And then I made this zine that has a lot of resources. It's kind of like a big online webpage with a lot of resources that I'll share as well. And I think like the reason why I kept it broad and kind of talked about these themes of reparations and democracy and sustainability is that in many ways, like most of y'all are integrating your Jewish values into your different kinds of practices already. And so it's not so complicated or, you know, impossible to say, okay, if I really care about sustainability, what would that look like in my investments and in my giving? And then pull that value in and then look at your investment options or talk to, you know, investment advisors that specialize in sustainability and figure out, okay, well, how can I embody that value, this Jewish value I have in my investing practices? And so that's why I like to keep it anchored with these kind of values that we can, and that we just keep saying anchor, these values that are clear so that when we get into investing, which can get so technical, we can know like what our foundation is for what we want to do.
Kate, I'm going to ask, how many of you are out there? I mean, clones of you. You know, this is a
that's an interesting question.
I know we do a little at a time. You know,
Yeah,
we have to start with each ourselves. But and do you see with the new administration, do you see supports for you know, creating a greater infrastructure? I have no idea what it might be, but support this kind of investing.
Yeah, totally. There's a lot of people doing this work. There's 1,000 young, wealthy people in resource generation that are dues paying members. I think over 1,000 now that are doing this redistribution in their giving and their investing. And then I think like with socially responsible investing as like a field, it's like getting so large. I don't have the number. It's like 10 trillion or, you know, it's something crazy in the amount of investments that are being shifted, like just out of, you know, regular kind of extractive investments into something that's at least screened or socially responsible in some way. And so I think that it's a growing field and that it like, especially people attribute it a lot to like millennials. They're like, millennials really want to take their values and connect it to their investing. But I think it's an all age thing that as we're living through so much like political and economic crisis, we're seeing, oh, in every aspect of my life, what does it look like for me to be pushing towards deeper and deeper values alignment with what I believe.
Well, and the baby boomers, you know, some of us were spouting this stuff way back.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting, but I think there's always been people like, I don't know if the frame is like class traders or race traders or what the frame is, but people are saying, I have power and privilege, but it's not right. I think the world should be more equitable. And so what does it look like for us to fight for justice? So yeah, always excited to be in the midst of people that are taking on those questions together. So this question, is there a minimum amount you need to invest in community opportunities? It depends on the kind of investment. Anyone can invest, like open an account at a Black-led credit union. I can share a resource for that. You can think about your banking as like a easy way to shift. And then some of these investments like Seed Commons, I mentioned that's like has a pretty high minimum. I think it's $25,000. And so there's a range. And there's also a lot online and kind of in terms of like pooled funding. So in this zine, in this zine that I share, there's like kind of a list of different investment opportunities across the spectrum. And then there are some good directories too that have kind of lists and minimum investment amounts.
Here's a question. Whoops. Thank you. Are there social justice spending credit cards? We spend much more than we save. Decades ago. Sorry, I'm trying to read this. Whoops.
Yeah, I see that.
Decades ago, we had a working assets credit card that was based on that principle. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think this is a great point around spending more, you know, spending being so important and thinking about where you spend your money, trying to not spend any money on Amazon, trying to spend it local businesses is a really powerful way to have an impact on our economy.
I'll chime in on that.
Yeah.
I also have put together a resource document that includes a bunch of the stuff that Kate's already told us about. So I was going to send that out to everybody after this event as well. And on there is a green credit card that I was kind of turned on to by the Jewish Earth Alliance. And it's called greenamerica.org. And they have a socially responsible investing page on their website as well. And also they sponsor a credit card that specifically makes sure that, you know, the bank that gets your money in the interim, you know, when you make your payments isn't spending that money on, you know, on things you don't want it to be spent on. So on socially just causes. So that link will be in the resources page that I share also after the session.
Great. Thank you, Darren. Do any of these organizations address mortgage opportunities / inequities available to communities that are or have been redlined?
Yeah, so there's 2 organizations I'm aware of. I actually think there's many more that do a lot of work around foreclosure prevention and around kind of affordable access to housing. And so I'll share one of those. Well, I can share them after. And then also investing in these community development financial institutions and credit unions that like many of these like credit unions and loan funds came out of like the civil rights movement and this work to address redlining and address kind of discrimination in finance. And so a lot of them do work intentionally in those communities that have been historically like excluded to provide like affordable and fair finance products to people that are buying their homes. And so you could check out, yeah, like Hope Credit Union that I mentioned does a lot of work like that. But credit unions and community development financial institutions all over the country do that.
Great. Kate, you talked about aligning your investments with your Jewish values being a process. I'm wondering if you could describe a little bit what that process was for you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rachel. For me, that process looked like looking at my investments. So I had to go through many hard conversations with my family to even get access to the information because I had a trust fund. And so there was this wealth that was being set aside in my name. And so I had to get access to those statements and kind of decode them to learn what was there. And then I wanted to start giving right away. So I was figuring out, okay, well, how much can I give? How much does my family give annually? Just asking a lot more questions so I could understand, oh, do you give $10,000 away? Do you give $100,000 away? Like, how do you make those decisions? So started doing more giving and then moved the money from the Wall Street investments that I was in into community investments. And then I moved it from community investments into like solidarity economy investments or like really experimental projects. Because it took me a while to figure out what those projects were, how to invest in them. And so community investments was kind of like an in-between step for me. And then I think that like part of it was naming what the values were that were most important to me. And so in looking at like the history of the wealth accumulation in my family, I was like, oh, I really want to support Black-led economic power building. I really want to support work in Baltimore. I really want to support work that addresses the racial wealth divide, and then being able to use those core values that I identified for myself in looking for investment opportunities and asking a lot of questions.
Great, very helpful.
Kate, I have a question. How do you, how do you consider your the difference between your investments and then your charitable giving? And how do you pick the organizations that you decide to give to charitable?
Totally. That's a great question. For me, it's been kind of a still unfolding process, because a lot of the distinction between investments and giving is around what you need for your financial goals later in life. So it's been an ongoing process for me to identify, well, how much is enough? How much do I need for me and my family? And then what is more than enough? And how can I give that away and redistribute that wealth? And so that's a really personal question, but it's also a really answerable question. So you can like do financial planning or kind of identify your financial goals. And so for me, my investments are an amount that I've set aside like for my future financial goals. And then I have those invested in community investments. On the giving side, something that's been really important to me is shifting the decision-making power, because like as a wealthy white person, I have these certain blinders on and I don't know what's needed in specific communities. And so for a while I was giving mostly to Bread and Roses Community Foundation, because they had an activist-led process for figuring out how to make those grants. And then as I got connected with more work, I was giving a lot, kind of the same values that I named in my process around shifting my investments. So how can I support Black-led organizing for justice? How can I support like the solidarity economy? And so that's where a lot of my giving goes. And it also goes, like, it's not just all over there, like it is also connected to projects that I'm connected to, or I give a lot of money to friends and people in my community too. And so it's not just through these kind of like activist-led funds, but that's been like a good way to escalate my giving for me, especially when I was going from giving like $500 a year away to giving 10,000. I was like, well, how am I going to do that? So I was grateful for Bread and Roses at that stage too.
Great. Another question. Is there an organization, bank, or other entity that can facilitate zero interest loans for us? I love this idea, but thinking about administering the loans is tough. It's almost
Totally.
like micro lending in Africa or other areas where $200 to $1,000 can make the difference between having a home and being homeless. So powerful.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, like Kiva was kind of trying to meet this need, and there was an organization, or like there was a branch of Kiva for a while called Kiva Zip, which was all 0% interest loans to US-based businesses. I don't know if that's still around, but there are.
How do you spell that, Kate? Kiva.
Kiva, K-I-V-A. So it used to be called Kiva Zip. And I think in some ways investing in like a community credit union or a community development financial institution, that's sort of like doing that. You're saying, okay, can you take this, $1,000, and can you figure out how to do that in the community? But it's not going out at 0% because it's these different financial institutions. But I love that idea too. And there was a group in Seattle that was doing it called Community Source Capital. Someone else might know too. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
And another thing too, like I'll encourage folks is if people are really interested in doing this work, it's really a lot easier to do it together in a community because you can research different things about a project, or you can put together options. So I'd encourage you to maybe, if there's a way to like collect those of y'all that are interested in being in a continued conversation so that you can look at some of these things together. It's a lot easier to do like with other people than on your own. So I'd encourage you to do it collectively together or through a community like Next Egg, or there's a national coalition for community capital. There's these different kind of like national groups too that do this kind of learning, but yes, it's definitely easier and more fun to do together. There's a group in Philly that Judy Wicks started, Circle of Aunts and Uncles, which is like a collection of people that do local lending together. And that was a really fun group. I don't know if they're open right now in the pandemic or how they're handling it, but it was a sweet opportunity to be able to like go in person and meet entrepreneurs directly and then kind of collectively make a decision to invest.
Judy's history is extraordinary. I actually knew her back in the day, and
Sweet.
she's a wonderful role model. She actually was many things, but it was known in West Philly as a person who started the White Dog Cafe and Black Cat store next to it. But her, and had a sister restaurant in Vietnam, I think, and has just done extraordinary kinds of community development around giving. But I know for me, just on an annual basis, I know how hard I work to try to find out whatever it is that I decide I can give, where it goes. And fortunately, there's Charity Navigator, for example, and just going through that and determining what criteria I wanted to measure an organization by, and certainly I wanted the bulk of my giving to go to services. And because it's not so obvious, and there have been so many scams, not to mention, organizations that got name recognition, but may not be, in fact, that responsible in terms of, really making sure the dollars get to the people for whom it's intended. And that was just its own big process. That's just something I evolved. And I've spoken to many people who really haven't necessarily given it that thought. So being able to elevate that kind of dissection and analysis to group level would be really valuable. Mary Ann, you have raised your hand.
Yes, I don't know if people have heard of Peter Singer, but anyway, there's an amazing group called GiveWell, and they came from an investment firm, and they figure out the biggest bang for your buck to reduce suffering, and they're really do their research. I think they're one of the best out there. They're called GiveWell.
Thank you. I remember you brought that up. Our Tikkun Olam committee has it's like so many books, so little time, so many ideas and ways we want to go, and we're a small group. So this kind of platform is just wonderful to, as we try to move forward and stake our agenda out, right? Is what's going to be next? Where do we go from here? So this has been great.
So that's actually a great segue into my last polling question while we still have a bunch of folks on. Let me see. Not that we're ending yet. If you still have questions, please feel free to ask them. But we were interested in finding out if folks would be interested in a follow-up program. Hopefully Kate would be willing to join us again and possibly bring along some contacts from local organizations such as PACA, Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance, maybe Seed Commons, maybe even Judy Wicks might be interested in joining us. Some of us have met her as well along the way. And so please do respond in here if you're still on this call to let us know if you would be interested in maybe, in 6 months or whatever, in the spring sometime, a follow-up event to talk more about local community investment opportunities. And so I'll just leave that out there for everybody while we maybe continue answering questions, Susan.
As we're talking about community investment and looking at this kind of biggest bang for your buck, reduce the most suffering for your buck solutions to invest in, something that we center in activism and that can also be centered in making decisions like this is the idea that I put forward before of community-led solutions of people who are working on the ground in the communities that have been affected by injustice in economic systems, injustice in all sorts of in all parts of society, and remembering that this is a kind of a new conversation for many of us, which is okay and good, and it's a conversation that we need to start to be having, but it's not a new conversation for many, many people who have been feeling the effects of injustice, of climate injustice, of racial injustice, of economic injustice for a long time, and who have been developing the solutions and working on the ground, developing the solutions, developing the plans, working with communities that people really need. And remembering that that's, you know, the solutions really do exist, and have been built out to a great, unbelievable extent by people who you know, who are working within their own communities with their own people, and thinking of keeping that in mind when we're looking for where to invest, where to donate, whether it is someone big coming in as a, you know, a supportive, large blanket entity, or people working on the ground who really have the experience and the knowledge, something that we always think about.
Very important.
Thanks so much, R. Another question here.
Okay, the poll's still open. I think there's one more question. Is there a reason for waiting 6 months to have the follow-up program?
I love that question. Just for planning purposes, and to make sure folks aren't, you know, zoomed out as much as possible. Just finding the right time to do it. So yeah, thank you for that. That's great. I love that. I love that.
And if you really like, if you're gung-ho and you want to go deeper this week, on Thursday, the Resource Generation Philly chapter is doing an investing webinar with Women's Community Revitalization Project. And I can drop a link for that in the chat. That'd be learning about a local investing opportunity in Philly. So local-ish.
Yeah, no, love that. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It looks like there's a bunch of people that haven't answered the poll, so please do answer it if you're still on. That's awesome. Kate, did you have any final thoughts before we?
No, I mean, I just have a lot of gratitude that you spent part of your Sunday learning about this work with me, and asking great questions. And I think that it's so powerful to be able to think about like the economy in this way, especially because we're in such a huge economic crisis right now. So to be able to bring our Jewish values along as we're trying to make a difference in the world. So yeah, just lots of gratitude for y'all, and to Ari for his great framing too.
I completely second that. Thank you so much, Kate, for taking time out of your Sunday and some hours, many hours before this to plan for this. So I really appreciate that. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. I will be sending out a bunch of resources, including all the links that Kate shared with us, to everyone whose email address that I have. So if you got my Zoom link emails, then you'll be getting that as well. And happy Hanukkah for those who celebrate. And I wish the best to all of you at the end of this year, and hoping for a much better year.
And thank you, Dara, for spearheading and getting this all together for us. You're the best. Thank you.
It's awesome to see all your faces out there. Thank you so much, guys. If you have more questions, I think, you know, we can all figure out where to ask them now. So thank you so much.
I have to say the timing of this program is really good, just before Hanukkah, and as you know, people worry about all the gift giving. This is a really wonderful to give ourselves and our community and our planet. And thank you so much.
Thank you
for doing this program.
Thank you, guys. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and have a great one. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Ellie. Oh, she just
Oh,
dropped
she
off.
she was fast. Bravo, brava, Dara.
That
Just
was wonderful, Dara.
Oh, thanks.
the
Thank
best, I feel.
Yeah, wonderful.
So
Thank you. I'm so glad. That was great. That was really great. So interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had something like, I don't know, like 45 people, something like that at the peak. We had people at
47. I saw 47 at the peak.
37 at one time. Yeah, there were some who were not on the screen. Mirala did get on, and she did say to me privately that she was really glad to, she came on a little late and then she'd have to leave early, but she really appreciated this being done.
Yeah.
I could see this being, reproduced and
Yeah, and just sent to many other synagogues.
Yeah, we'll have to share it. I'm going to stop the recording now, actually.